Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Today, I have a special show for you with Father Robert Sirico of the Acton Institute. He's been on the show a couple times before, and your appearance, Father, is special today because it bookends from the beginning perspective the campaign you're going to be doing for this book, which comes out May the 10th, 2022. It's called The Economics of the Parables, and I am really excited for this one. Welcome back to Rules for Retrogrades.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you. Thank you.
You know, from past conversations we've had, I think the first time you ever came on the show, it was called Cath Min Gov Week, Catholic Minimum Government Minarchy Week. And, you know, I was probably most excited about interviewing you, though. It was 6 really good interviews. You know that I'm curious about the economics of the parables. I'm curious that the left-leaning church never deals with this topic of the 2 talents, which I've used this thing for 15 years as a counterexample to the idea that Christ hates the notion of investment. It's like, well, he's admonishing it for an opening shot, a big opening shot. Could you explain to us whether or not, as a matter of fact, Jesus meant what he said when he told us the principle of the 2 talents?
Well, let me start off by saying I try to inoculate the reader right at the beginning that what I'm not proposing here is a kind of Catholic theonomist approach. I'm not saying that there is a Christian economics. I'm not saying that there is a biblical economics. The economics of the parables is not the economic ideology taught in the parables. It's the reality of economics as human action that is presumed by any person who's going to use metaphors or examples drawn from the world of commerce or things that touch on commerce. So, of course, what you see in the parable of the talents, that's the one you're referring to because this appears several times in various of the synoptics, is the reality of needing to produce, to be creative, to engage your creativity in response to the call to fidelity. And that's exactly what happens with these servants who are entrusted with these talents. And I think what's most interesting about it is the reaction of the one who buries the talent. Now, notice he doesn't lose the money. He just doesn't replenish it. He doesn't produce it. And it's his attitude toward the master. Do you remember what he says to the master when the master comes and says, "What did you do with my money?"
Well, he says he was scared.
That's right. The first thing he says, "I was afraid." And that's important because certainly in an economic sense, no one who is going to be economically creative can do it without having some risk. That's why we're not all wealthy, right? Is that it takes some risk. But the second thing he says is, "I knew that you were a cruel man, gathering where you have not scattered, reaping what you didn't sow, and so I hid the money." Now that tells you what his attitude is toward the master. This this is what I'm trying to grapple with in the economics of the parables, is to show the transcendence or the transcendent meaning of the passages from the world of scarcity, which is the world in which the question of economics arises. And when this man says this to the master, he really, well, I can't say he's echoing, Marx is echoing this man's attitude, because that's their accusation against people who are involved in enterprise, that you're gathering what you have not added any value to this thing. You're the exploiter. And that's what this man, who should have been grateful for the opportunity to the master, nonetheless is resentful.
In the tradition well embraced by Acton Institute from Leo, I guess we call it the Leonine tradition, beginning with Rerum Novarum, 1891 through Quadragesimo Anno, 1931, embraced very warmly by Pius XI, picking up on many of the insinuated notes of Rerum Novarum and explicitly expressing them socioeconomically. And then even, what would it be, 60 years later, taken up by John Paul II in Centesimus Annus. I forget how many of these three linked socioeconomic encyclicals, Father, pick up on this point. It's either two of them or all three of them. They make specific the Leonine point that that when we're talking about oikonomia, when we're talking about economy, we are not just talking about dollars and cents alone, because Leo says, I used to know the paragraph and the exact verse, so I'm forgetting. Somewhere paragraph 70 to 80, he says quite explicitly, it's not, egalitarianism is foolish because we're not all given equal talents of mind. We're not all given equal talents of purse. We're not all given equal talents of looks or athletic ability.
Right.
This is what's lovely about Jesus's parable of the two talents that you keyed into right away in that first answer. Economy includes everything. It's comprehensive. So the idea of parceling off one section of life, dollars and cents, and trying to egalitarianize that, equalize that, is as foolish as the short story Harrison Bergeron, right? Where the good-looking people have to put a paper bag over their head, or the athletic people have to carry around extra weights. Right. And the two talents keys into this as well. It's about scarcity, and anyone who wants to do anything worthwhile, economic in the dollars and cents sense or otherwise, you got to take a risk. You got to be brave, and there's virtue involved in being brave, isn't there?
I think so. What's fascinating about the talents, both the one you're referring to, or the parables, the one you're referring to, but also it pervades all of them, is their enduring nature. And I think part of the reason that they are so enduring, I mean, with all due respect to us, I don't know that 100 years after our death, people are going to be exegeting our texts or our podcasts, right? Here's 2,000 years later, we're still grappling with the parables. And part of the reason, I think, is precisely the vagueness of parts of the parables, the ambiguities in the parables, the fact that you don't have resolutions to things, or that things seem contradictory within the story itself. Jesus surprises us repeatedly with the reversal of fortunes that occurs, whether it's the laborers in the vineyard or the story of the rich man and Lazarus, so that within the vagueness, we have the opportunity to meditate on and even put ourselves into these stories and wonder, how would I have reacted? Were I there? What would I have done if I were the last in the line of the workers being paid after having labored all day in the vineyard? Or another question dealing with this parable of the talents is, what if the successful entrepreneurs that Jesus entrusted his talents to lost the money? Because you say there's risk. What if they had lost the money? They made a good faith effort. What would have been? We would have had a whole different parable. What would have been the reaction of the master?
Right, which happens a good bit of the time. The marketplace forces are such force of entropy.
Yes, right? And not all failures in the market are moral failures. You know, this is the testimony against prosperity gospel. You know, that you have to be prosperous if you're really a child of God, and if you're not prosperous, it's you don't have enough faith. That's the ideology of the prosperity gospel. That's not the philosophy of the gospel of Christ, that market failures are not necessarily moral failures. They may be miscalculations, they may be weather-related, catastrophes that happen that have nothing to do with one's choice.
Yeah, I want to ask you something regarding the metaphor. Well, it's a linguistic overlap. I'm not sure if it's intended to be a metaphor. Maybe you know. Talents of silver, talents of, they mean personal gifts from the Lord that are marketable, but they're a talent whether or not they're marketable. Is there a moral analogy to be drawn between what you just said against the prosperity gospel? Hey, not all failures in the marketplace, not all misuses of your silver talents are moral failures. How about are all failures of misuse or misspent talents, or perhaps just bad luck of your non-economic talents? Are these all moral? I mean, are we supposed to draw from the Aristotle would call it an equivocal term, talents of silver, talent in the sense we use it in more commonly in English? Should we
Well, we
think
get that from the monetary unit that's employed in this thing. We get the word talent, and we have now broadened the meaning to say gifts, as we commonly use the word talent. But yes, I think it does stand in complete opposition to the philosophy of both, by the way, I think the parables in general, but to the philosophy of prosperity gospel, but also liberation theology. I cite a number of liberation theologians who want to eisegete the gospels and to impose upon these gospels a certain set of ideologies that are not, I mean, really, when I'm asked, well, what was Jesus's understanding of economics? Well, there was no economics.
Right.
Economics comes later. This is just the world in which people live that is scarce, where time is scarce and resources are scarce. And then you trade and you look for opportunities. And that's what becomes a systematized notion of economics. So it isn't that Jesus is teaching economics. If anything, he gives us the moral framework in which we can build a good economics.
Yeah, that's interesting. The moral framework is what any good Catholic should be considering anyway, as he considers economic decisions. Can I ask you a question about the vineyard workers? Father Sirico?
Yes, that's a rough one, isn't
it? It seems like a rough one, but I mean, well, first off, as a preliminary matter, what's more common? You as a priest heading the Acton Institute, being open and notorious for doing so, running into gainsayers who throw at you prosperity gospel in Catholic circles, or some iteration of liberation theology? I know what I would guess.
Well, in Catholic circles, it's more liberation theology. It's more from the left. From the evangelicals, you'll get some of the prosperity gospel stuff. So that's what I get mostly, questions like, well, wasn't the early church communist? Or I had one, we were doing a session on, I think it was the parable of the talents. And a priest got up, it was a seminar with priests, and got up and said, well, this is completely, you're reversing what the real meaning of the gospel is. The bad guy in the gospel was the owner who gave the money, and the good guy was the guy who didn't make a profit. And I said, well, that's the first time I've heard that. Nobody in the whole history of commentaries has come up with that one. I think actually there is a line of thought on the left, because they can't let it just stand in its most obvious understanding.
Yeah. Have you ever read that retelling of the story of Little Red Riding Hood from the perspective of the big bad wolf, where she's really the interloper and her grandma is like a tax cheat or something, and therefore he had every right to eat the grandmother? It's
sure, I can understand that. Yeah,
eisegesis. Yeah,
that's right. And I handle a few of these in the book in the course of it. Of course, one of them published by Orbis, a whole book on this kind of stuff, published by the Catholic liberation theologians of North America.
Great.
Mary Noel.
They used to be restricted to South America, and they've moved north, like Kid Cisco or something.
But we could digress, but I don't think it was ever really South American. I think it was always a Western European idea. Gutierrez, Boff, these guys studied in Germany and brought back political theology and then placed it in a Latin American framework.
Boff, yeah, he's allegedly, we're told Francis hates liberation theology, but isn't Boff quite close with Francis?
I don't know if they're close, but yeah, no, he certainly likes him and has been generous toward him. The Pope's own approach is more what they call people's theology. It's not the kind of Marxist approach. It's more the Latin American Peronist approach that Francis grew up with.
Yeah, Latin populist left of center that gets thrown out as Peronist right, but to North Americans we'd say this is Latin populism, which is still left of. Well, I want to bring you back, Father, to the vineyard workers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let you chew on this question, because this is sort of the central question of the interview as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Then I'm gonna do some shout outs and you think about it. So first, here's my question for you, the central one of this interview. The vineyard workers, is this parable about private sector charity? Are we being admonished toward private sector charity, or public sector redistributionism? So think about that. We'll play our Jeopardy music in our head. And for right now, since we're thinking of economics and things like that, I want to remind everyone the economics of YouTube works as such. You have to click like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, or else you're not going to be able to see our videos in the future. So do so now. I don't bother you guys enough to do that. Parish Orphans and the Retrogrades. Also on the crass petty domain of economics, people ask me all the time, how come we don't call out how to support the program more often, or at least once a show? Many shows do it 3 times a show. Well, it's Patreon. Go to Timothy J. Gordon Patreon. We try not to annoy you, but there are lots of extra benefits you get in 2022 that patrons did not get in 2021. Also, the economics of space. I urge everyone out there with regularity, as I urged many years ago when I wrote Catholic Republic, to get to your truer republic, which is your state. States' rights is what subsidiarity calls us to, what Roman Catholicism calls us to. If you live in a blue state, you need to get to a red state. That's what I say. Get from, as I did, the bluest of the blue to the reddest of the red here in the blood red swath of Southeastern American states from Texas to Florida. Go to realestateforlife.org, and a good pro-life, 9 out of 10 of them are Catholics, will help you do so. It is realestateforlife.org. And now we can get Father Robert Sirico, who's publishing, who's about to release The Economics of the Parables on May the 10th.
There it is right there.
Oh,
it's
beautiful.
on Amazon for pre-order, so you can get it. Well, how in the world can you get the distributist state from this parable? Or the other parable that's very often used is the Good Samaritan. Here's the model for the welfare state. Right. And the reason I say in both of these cases that it's impossible is the whole presupposition is that in the case of the owner of the vineyard, he's concerned about the profitability of his agricultural investment. And he goes out to find workers because there's a labor shortage. How about something ripped from the headlines, right? There's a labor shortage. If this harvest fails, or a significant portion of it fails, this is going to represent an economic disaster, both for the owner, so there you have private ownership, but also for those who depend on the product of this field. So he has to go out there and get the workers. It really underscores as well the subjectivity of prices, because from the perspective of the first workers, they were satisfied with the agreement.
Yeah.
And going through the whole day, each of the people, even when they're not told what they're going to be specifically paid, are satisfied because at least there's something. It's only at the end of the day when they can compare that they become envious. In fact, that's what the master says. Are you envious because I am generous? And then, of course, the reason that the left doesn't comment on this too much is that he says, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own property? I mean, he says it right there explicitly.
Yeah.
And the workers, of course, it's the resentment that you see on the part of those who think they have the established privileged position. You see it in the prodigal of the I'm sorry, the parable of the prodigal son with the older son as well. He has this entitlement mentality.
Right.
And the father tries to reconcile him in the same way that he reconciles the younger son.
He thinks he's paid his time forward and he's about to vest.
You owe me.
Yeah, you owe me. Look, I think the Vineyard workers is the best, most lasting, enduring, ringing endorsement for Article 1, Section 10 of what would later become the U.S. Constitution, the Contracts Clause. Meaning it's also a case for those who study constitutional law, a strong case for, Lochner. If you know the Lochner cases, listen to this. This is Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution. No state shall, there's one of the few ways that the U.S. federal Constitution delimits the states. The Constitution otherwise just delimits the U.S. Fed. But it says, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And here, these are like the 6 things state governments aren't allowed to do. State governments are allowed to do everything else. It's the Fed that's not allowed to do most of this stuff in Article 1, Section 8. But here's the Contracts Clause. Besides pass any bill of attainder or ex post facto law or law impairing the obligation of contracts or any grant any title of nobility. So that's the entire Article 1, Section 10. And that's the point. One of the few 7 or 8 things that a state legislature is not allowed to do, though it's got basically all these implied powers, is to impair the obligation of contracts, which is essentially what the other workers in the Vineyard are, in a roundabout way, asking the employer to do in the parable, right? They're sticking their noses into his business when he's like, all I'm doing here, bro, is overpaying the wage of this guy because I like his face or I feel bad for him or some other undisclosed reason. Isn't that right? This has nothing to do with redistribution.
Right. No, I think that's quite the case. The one corrective I would offer, Tim, though, is it's when you, and maybe you just said it without thinking about it. I wouldn't say that the gospel endorses the Constitution.
No.
But I think we need to be very clear about this because that's what we're going to be accused of. I know that's what I'm going to be accused of in writing this book, that I've eisegeted it. Right. What we can say, however, is that there is a way in which the Constitution, or certainly the founders, were inspired by the ethic of the gospel.
Of course.
And so that's what you see. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, you're steering clear, Father, with good reason, of that which you will certainly be accused of, like we were talking before we rolled tape, of those things that my wife and I have been accused of for writing these 2 anti-Catholic feminism books, The Case for Patriarchy and Ask Your Husband, which will be re-released in a couple short weeks, a week and a half, hopefully. And the first thing is the prosperity gospel. The second thing is this crass or false superimposition of the U.S. Constitution into the gospel. No, but what is being explicitly endorsed, is the obligation of impairing the obligation of contracts is immoral. Sure. That is a time-honored principle, and that's what I was suggesting here.
I knew what you were saying, but I wanted to be clear because people want to create mischief.
They like mischief. Well, I mean, it seems like, are you arguing in the book as a kind of overarching thesis? Because it seems strongly this way to me. There is one mind between and among all of these economic parables.
I think the economics of these parables, as I see them, to the extent that they speak about property or contract, is a natural law, a kind of common way of understanding the way one can better deal with resources and property. You always have to keep your eye open, because Jesus will then invert the whole thing and put it on its head, where the strong become weak and the weak become strong. In the case of the rich man and Lazarus, it's usually the rich who are known, their names are known. In that parable, it's the poor man whose name is known. The rich man, we don't know his name. The tradition gives him a name, but we don't know his name. And so it's these reversals that take place are very interesting. So if you don't study it and follow it clearly enough, you will think that this is the whole ethics that's being proposed, and it's not. Jesus is always pushing the kingdom of God, the transcendence. And what he's doing it from, the context he's doing it from, is the context of scarcity. So he naturally is going to employ economic metaphors to achieve that end.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that scarcity is a morally neutral proposition?
It's a human proposition. It's a human context. It's just a given. You can't avoid it. That's why leaving out the ideology in any society where people are surviving in any sense of a just way, they're going to come up with some form of a market because it's so natural to surviving in the world of scarcity, scarce time, scarce resources. And you have to employ some device to calculate that in order to provide for human betterment.
Yeah, you're saying it's a brute fact of human life. I often give this analogy to people. Father, you respond to it. It's as brute a fact of human life, and in this sense, at least morally neutral, if not ennobling. Think of when you're a little kid and you first struck upon the conceit that you could open up a lemonade stand and make cash money, which is exciting. You have no idea of overhead because you're just ripping off your parents' lemon
Anyway,
but leave that to one side for the moment. What you do, what I did, because I've never met a shortcut I didn't like. You know, that was always one of my. It's like, hey, we're gonna get out there. We're gonna slang up some lemonade, and we're gonna start seeing what cars stop. We'll just sell this thing for $10 a glass, sell a few glasses, and then we'll go get some tasties at the drugstore or whatever we're selling this for. So get some candy. That doesn't work, because if you're trying $10 a glass, cars don't slow down. The principle of scarcity works both ways. Then you might, let's say, overreact to the other side and make it a penny a glass, and cars are slowing down too much and they're drinking up all your lemonade, and you've sold, I don't know, 100 glasses and you've only made $1. So then you realize I have to equivocate to a place of economic reasonability. And I mean, this is what Aristotle will call, dare I say, the natural value of the good. And it is a range. It's not a set thing, but
exactly
to sell the good, the lemonade in this case, for what is at least approximates the real economic value of a glass of lemonade, it maybe not morally, it might maintain its moral neutrality, but it is an ontological good, right? You're providing a good and or a service, and you're locating something approximating the real value of the glass of lemonade. Isn't it good?
The truth of the matter is that the price doesn't exist until somebody buys it. You can have it in your head that the price of this glass of lemonade is 25 cents a glass. But you could sit there all day, and if you haven't sold a glass of lemonade for 25 cents, then the price isn't 25 cents. And this is one thing about economics that a lot of people don't understand, is that the price is not set by the capitalist, but by the consumer. Moreover, the color of the lemonade. Is it going to be pink lemonade, or is it going to be lemon lemonade, or yellow lemonade? All of that is dictated by the consumer. And that's another thing that you see played out in a number of these parables.
That's interesting. Yeah, you get a stark sense of this when you sell things on eBay. You have like me, like young Tim Gordon trying to sell a $10 glass of lemonade to a bunch of suckers who don't exist. No cars slowed down. You have the two modes on eBay, which is a forum where I re-uptook a hobby from childhood, collecting sports cards a little later in life. There are two modes by which a seller can sell on eBay. There is the absolute price. Hey, I want to sell you my Michael Jordan rookie card for, market price plus 50%. And it just sits there. Or the more real-time mode of auctioning, where the actual value of the commodity is circumlocuted. It's come to not by the seller, but by the buyers. It goes up as high as the buyers push it. This is not the story that you're hearing from Pope Francis or from the liberation theologians either.
Yeah. Well, they have very little acquaintanceship with how a market functions and only see it as a exploitation. It's interesting to see the contradiction in Pope Francis's economic teaching, because on the one hand, he does say that at times, that it's exploitive, and you get this sense of it. But then you'll come upon, like in Laudato Si, or maybe it was Fratelli Tutti, where he talks about the importance of business people providing jobs for people through their successful enterprise. I forget the exact phrasing he uses, but then it just stops there. He doesn't go any further to say, well, if that's the case here, what about overall? How do people rise out of poverty? Is it just by distribution? Or is distribution, redistribution, charity exactly for emergency circumstances, whereas the normative way is that people engage in enterprise? It's the more ennobling way as well, because they're participating in their own amelioration.
Yeah, I wish it were a quantifiable asset. How much I appreciate some commodity that was just given to me and begins being given to me on a regular basis. If you could quantify that from the mind of God, how lowly I value that commodity versus something that you work hard for. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. I talk about it in the context of my forthcoming Regnery book. Your book's on Regnery. Our book is going to be Don't Go to College. And I've also talked about it a great deal in the realm of feminism, where I'm telling people, get married young. To be young and married and a little bit poor is healthy and good when you're 20. It doesn't feel so healthy when you're 30 or 40, but when you're young and you're just excited that you could do whatever you want after you graduated high school, like Paul and Paula, this is the most beautiful thing in the world. You can marry whoever you want, and you're no longer under the household of your fathers, you or your wives. Now you have freedom, economic freedom and moral freedom, and you can run the kind of household you want, and it's worth a little bit of poverty, isn't it? To see, and whatever assets you're able to bring in, if you're just a young married person, you enjoy them, you treasure them so much more than if they were given to you by a redistributive state on the one hand, or you enjoy them more than you will in 10 or 20 years when you've got more economic wealth. They're just worth that much more to you. I always wished you could quantify that somehow.
Yeah, I think it is difficult to quantify that. I share that experience. I didn't grow up, my family was working class. And there was just something about having to be attentive to what you had and what you needed and how you could work the circumstance so that you could get a little bit more out of something. I mean, to this day, I still will put water in a shampoo bottle and shake it to get the last, because I remember my dad doing that. He said, don't just throw that out. You can get another shampoo out of that one. And what that does is it brings out of you something that you see played out in these parables, and that is attentiveness. The treasure hidden in the field was discovered by someone who was obviously looking and drew it out and then puts it back and goes and buys the whole field. The attentiveness that is required as a habit. And that, I think, is what scarcity can do in a certain margin. I mean, you don't want a person not being able to live. I mean, if they don't have enough to live on, literally, then you have a whole different circumstance. And that's where charity kicks in.
When wrapping up here, Father, excellent chat as always about your book, The Economics of the Parables, put out by Regnery. It's on pre-order now, but except it will actually hit on May the 10th, which is exciting for you. But we have a super chat question.
Yes.
People out there realizing what you're pitching in real time and recasting this question at you. This person says, what about economic personalism? The book called Economic Personalism by Graney and Broan. Do you know this book? I don't know it.
It's a relatively new book, isn't it? Years ago, we had the Center for Economic Personalism at the Acton Institute. And it really is derived from, I haven't read this book. I don't think, I may have seen it in a draft form, but I haven't read the whole thing. But my understanding of the personalism is it kind of comes out of the phenomenology of not only the phenomenologists, but John Paul, all of which kind of goes back to Husserl, and even further back to, in the economic sense, Mises and the founders of phenomenology. And it breaks off into certainly a psychological form of personalism, and then the economic form of personalism, which is the Austrians, and we consider ourselves a part of that tradition. And then, of course, the theological, as you see in the philosophical in John Paul II. This engagement, the reverence for the human person, the recognition that value emerges from the human person, because it's the human person who's attentive to things as they are in themselves. And I like the notion. Also, the moral teaching of what you see in the theology of the body. That's another form of personalism. So the economic personalism really puts the human being at the center, both in their creative dimension, but also just in their metaphysics. This really answers the question of egalitarianism, because human beings are equal at the most fundamental level of their being, and that is in their ontology. In who they are as a creation of God, and the accidents of their existence, the way they look, their intellectual capacity, don't determine the sense of justice.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm friends with a couple who have a really, really, really new and yet Thomistic, exciting personality system. Much, much, much more Catholic, innately Catholic, called NCAPS, and they're really into JP2's personalism, and more than anything, the science is amazing. I'd
Really?
like to introduce you to them behind the scenes, Father.
Sure, I'd be very interested in that.
You would like it. I know. I have a strong inclination toward that. But look, congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
It just looks fascinating. I haven't gotten to read it yet, which is why we had a more roundabout conversation of the economics of the parables. This is one I will read. You can bet your bottom dollar, by Regnery. So this means we're label mates here, because
we're cousins.
Yeah, cousins. Don't Go to College and the Economics of the Parables.
It's a great publishing house. 75 years of publishing, books like these.
Yeah, the top name in conservative secular publishers around the world. Absolutely. Just they're at the top of the ladder, and
they were the first English publishers or American publishers of Guardini as well.
Oh,
did you know that? Yeah, Guardini, and also did Human Action, Mises.
I did know that. I did know that. That's a good one. And their Politically Incorrect guidebook series. I just finished an introduction to the Constitution course that I teach on timothyjgordon.com. Folks out there listening, we're going to have a flash sale on summer pre-recorded courses at the Retrograde Academy at timothyjgordon.com. With the Constitution course I just taught is a Regnery book. They have a series, Father. I know you know.
Yes, I know. No, I was invited to do one of them, but I thought it was a little too edgy.
Interesting. The Politically Incorrect Guide series?
Yes. I've forgotten the one that they asked me to do. It was either on economics or Catholicism. I've forgotten which.
Ooh, and Tom Woods, who I know you know,
yes.
He did a couple of them. Some of the real cutting edge thinkers in terms of Catholic available economics from the Austrian school,
right,
work for the Politically Incorrect Guide. Anyway, Regnery's just cutting edge. I'm very proud to be associated with them, and I'm excited for this book to come out. People, go purchase this right now. It's on pre-order. The Economics of the Parables. Father Robert Sirico, any parting shots?
Thank you. No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you. It's St. John Paul II said that economics, or entrepreneurship, he said, throws practical light back onto the gospel. And that's what I tried to do in this text. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share that with you and your collaborators.
Thank you so much, Robert Sirico, Father Robert Sirico, and everyone out there. Go pick up the book. Stay tuned. We got a couple other exciting, unique shows for you later this week. You're gonna hear from me tomorrow. Hopefully, we have an article, Dr. Michael Robillard and myself, coming up on Fox News, an op-ed on 5 reasons not to go to college. It's supposed to hit tomorrow morning. You always cross your fingers with op-eds. So if that comes up, you'll see 2 shows in 2 days from me, and I'll have Dr. Robillard on. Father Sirico, as always, it's exciting to have you on the show because I've admired your work for a long time. Have a great day. Everyone out there, stay tuned. God bless. Love your wives and kids.